Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Experiences podcast, where we uncover potential design improvements in the world around us by exploring one frustrating experience at a time. I'm your host and chief observer, Geoff Wilson, based out of Auckland, and joining me today is Guy Thompson, a Kiwi based in Melbourne.
Hi, Geoff. Nice to join you again virtually.
Yes. And, I want to get straight to it. Guy, you've been thinking about the past episodes we've done, right?
Yes. We've talked about these real experiences that you have before and literally everyday experiences. And now I think this is a great way to connect it to the digital world around the fact that we've all, for every interface that we've used for many, many years, from operating systems to phones and all these kinds of different devices, they all have buttons either physically on the outside of the device or on the interface. And these sort of talk to us in a way that we're familiar with because of buttons in the real world. So the question I wanted to ask you, Geoff, was around, you are really observant and you're often detecting and noticing and observing these things on a daily basis. So what is it about buttons that you notice in the real world that really fascinates you? What's something you keep going back to when you see them?
Well, fascination is all about annoyance more than anything else. It's when you press something and you can't tell what's actually happened. It's when you can't find what you're trying to look for. Like you're trying to exit a door, but you can't find the one button that exists to open that door to unlock it. So it's not fascinating between most things. It's that of just this frustration, which is like the whole basis of half this podcast. But then it is, the same frustrations do exist in the digital world. They exist that same way of, can I find the unsubscribe button that I need to click? Can I find whatever it is I'm trying to actually do? And just diving into that aspect of it all. Did you go to the office today by any chance?
I did, yes. Very modern offices. So all those sorts of interface elements where, you've got to press the keypad before you get into the elevator and all those sorts of things as well.
But then by the time you walk there, you forget which elevator you might have been waiting for. So you have to walk back, press the button again.
I've had that same experience before where you're in a really modern office environment and you're dealing with these very new elevators, which have these digital touchscreen panels for you to plan which floor you want to go to. And then it tells you which elevator is going to arrive. And then there's like 3 elevators that arrive at once. And you're like, I'm forgotten which one is mine. And so you sort of jump in and you look at the panel and see if the number's there. And occasionally you'll accidentally get sort of stuck in the wrong elevator. And you can tell when you get in with other people as well, because it's only going to 2 floors and there's like 3 people and none of them know each other. So it's kind of getting caught out around those new digital systems where there's a system before you get in the elevator, whereas normally you can interact with the elevator on the inside. I've noticed a lot of the newer ones, once you're in, you're stuck and there's a digital display telling you where you're going, what floor you're on, and which floors it's going to stop at, but there's no other buttons inside it to go anywhere except ground. So you can exit, but you can't go anywhere else.
But actually, I would love that. And this is kind of what we talked about I guess it was 2 episodes ago. Again, who knows what release order these come out in. We talked about when usability falls off a cliff, and that's one of those instances, I think, because like recently I was trying to leave the office. It was 5 p.m. I got an elevator, pressed ground on the keypad outside. They told me to get in C, got in C, and then it like picked me up. It picked somebody else up at floor 1. Okay, that's fine. She's probably going down. But then we skipped ground and went straight to basement 1. I was like, well, okay, how do I get back to ground? So I walked out, pressed the button again. It said elevator C. I was like, oh, that's weird. I'll get back in it. Maybe it'll take me to ground because I'm in the basement now. And it starts going back up. And all of a sudden, we're back at floor 2. I'm like, it's skipping over it. And so like I keep pressing this button. It keeps telling me which one to get on. And it keeps skipping the floor. And so there's not even a way for me to go ground. I just want ground. I want an emergency override. Just get me to ground. It doesn't exist. And so
the emergency override when you're stuck in the elevator. It's one of those tricky everyday experiences, which is just odd about living and working in these very, very new buildings. But this is one of the exciting things that I think is going to be interesting to cover in this episode. What real buttons in the real world are translated to when they appear in digital forms, but also are there kinds of things that are happening in the digital world that are starting to come into the real world as well? Are we kind of getting this? Are we getting this cross-pollination of design elements going in both directions around what do buttons mean? What's easy to interface with? What's easy to interact with? And what do we assume something does before we touch it? We can see a button there and we go up to it and we interact with it. But of course, now that we all over the world are less inclined to be touching physical buttons in a real space surrounded by other people, is this button now an elbow activated button or do you touch it with your key fob of your building? There's lots of different ways to interact with buttons now. And I think it'd be an interesting discussion to have about what does button interaction look like, both in the real world and digital as well.
So with that, what is your new favorite word? The word of whenever you take a physical object and you translate it into the digital world. What is that?
Yes, this would be skeuomorphism. And of course, I got it wrong
Yes.
in initially thinking anthropomorphism about humans interacting and becoming like cartoon characters. But skeuomorphism is that process of taking something in the real world and translating over to a digital interface of some kind on screen of a graphical user interface.
And I realized, the example I would always go to is the first iPhones or those first smartphones where every note taking app you had looked like a notebook, like a spiral bound notebook with lines and actual metal spirals, or calendars look like a flip calendar. All the icons represented the same thing. But now I realize also, depending on who's listening to this and how old people are, they might not have even been like using those things at that time. So, man, I really don't see those much. I guess now I don't, or at least I don't pay attention to it as much. The ones I think that still might exist. Toggles are still quite close in some sense. A light switch, you toggle up and down,
Mm.
so they don't look exactly like that in most of our interfaces. They're more like slide toggles or an on off. But that does come from that kind of design. It was a toggle that you use on the wall, and it became something that we use in our everyday designs now on any kind of app you ever use.
Early on, when people were trying to design interfaces, there was sort of two schools of thought around this, right? There was the process of just designing something that was really aesthetically beautiful in terms of a design on screen, a graphical user interface. And there was a different school of thought that was saying, well, in order for this to be intuitive and people to know how to use it, I want to make it look like a real button, a real thing. And of course, the extreme version of that I would use is very early on for music production software. You would get plugins and apps and pieces of software, and the interface looked exactly like the real
Yeah.
kit, the real thing that we'd use, like a Tascam 808, like the real thing
Oh,
that
I was
we'd
gonna say
use
music. Yeah.
in the real world, right? So,
Yeah.
and you'd have these racks, and you'd plug them in, literally plug them in with virtual cables to each other, and they'd interact in different ways. And this was kind of a cool thing because it meant that you could kind of have this digital music system as a portable kit in your laptop. Of course, this laptop's got more powerful. Back in the 90s, this was more of a thing that was just on your desktop. But even when I remember all the way back to like Winamp, you'd have these different
I was waiting
skins
for you
that
to say
could,
that. Yep.
right, that could look like an actual amplifier or some kind of cool, desirable piece of equipment that's very expensive in the real world, and your digital version of it is much cheaper and much more accessible. And I think that's changed a little bit now, because in the real world, a lot of those physical devices, those real kinds of pieces of equipment, are far more understated. They're really kind of, they almost feel like they've taken some of those design cues from a digital world and taken them into the physical world. If you look at really high-end audio amplifiers and audiophile kind of equipment, it's quite understated now compared to what it was beforehand. So it's interesting to see those design influences going in both directions.
One that was quite interesting that we were kind of chatting about beforehand, and giving people into the secrets of how this actually works. It's We were talking about like what kind of ways would things not work the same? What kind of buttons don't exist the same way? And we started talking about buttons where you might have to flip open a cover, like a protective thing. It wants to protect you from pressing a physical button, like the nuclear launch button, right? That idea. Maybe it's again a fire alarm, so you have to lift up a lever or lift up a flap before you press a button. Whereas in the digital world, that doesn't exist as much. You click it, the action happens, and you expect it to happen within X many milliseconds. We don't have those kind of safety guards as much because people expect digital things to work the second you press it. However, that calls into the importance of, it's a little bit off track, but the idea of undo buttons, right? Or the undo
Hmm.
functions. And that's why those things exist. It's one of, Jacob Nielsen's 10 heuristics for usability of like help users with errors. So provide people a way to escape the thing they just did, especially if it's a non-destructive action, like let them go back, let them fix something. And that's why destructive actions such as, do you want to delete this file? It usually asks you that question again. Are you sure you want to delete it?
I know it's not a button, but when if you're going to use diesel fuel, you've got to lift this thing and then pull this thing out. You've got to go through an extra couple of steps to make sure that you actually want to perform this action. And so we get that in a digital world, that you are prompting the user to just double check, is this the course of action you want to be taking? But I think there's probably another couple of things that could be changed in terms of user interface design to make that little cancel or delete or log out button a little bit harder to get to. to in order to actually do
I'm
that.
getting worried about this though.
Well, I
Like,
know that like neither of us are actively designing user interfaces on a daily basis, but we're working with team members who will then take our ideas or a change we're making or something that we need to do within an interface or within a user journey to get the result we want. So I think thinking about the ways that people are interacting with these interfaces is important to work out that journey. And does everything make sense? Is it logical? And certainly, I know when I was working full time as a designer, I wasn't always thinking about logic. I was just thinking about aesthetics. So being involved in that conversation, saying, hey, is this the best way to do it? And can we test it on different users? That's definitely going to give you something that performs better than if you're just making it look pretty.
and because I was never good at aesthetics and I never knew what to put in, I was always the opposite. I was always that, like, I want to talk about the use cases and the flow and all of that stuff. Like, aesthetics be damned, because to me, that's not what I care about. I want the content first. I want the flow of it first.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly what I find myself thinking about now, because if I'm in a meeting and talking about, the proximity to the login, cancel, back button and the confirm, submit button, I'm like, I want those as far apart from each other as possible. I don't care if it looks ugly. I don't care if it's in the middle of the screen or somewhere else. Make sure they're not close to each other, because I don't want someone to hit it by accident.
Now, there's a ton of ways you could alternatively do that. It's not just go with the first idea you've got in mind, Guy. But we won't get into that. We'll let the actual UI designers yell at us for all those aspects.
Absolutely. Things that we assume that are going to work, you've got to sort of test them. But at the same time, when you get a really good sense of like, this works really well this way, just go with it and then see how people are actually performing when they use it.
Yes.
One of the changes that I noticed that Google did a while ago was with the Chrome browser, adding a function there that you have to hold down Command Q or Control Q to quit the software. You couldn't just tap it and it would escape. You'd actually have to hold it down to make sure you definitely want to exit the browser, because you can have so much stuff going on, right? You can have all these multiple tabs and you've got your Google Documents open, you've got your calendar, you've got all these different functions, and you don't necessarily actually want to get out of your browser. You just want to put your machine to sleep or do something else. So this avoiding that accidental quit through one keystroke is just adding a prompt there as well.
People also try to hide links and buttons often nowadays if they don't want you to do something. Like Amazon, for example, doesn't want you to ever cancel a subscription to Amazon. What is it? Video? I forgot what it's called.
The Prime service. Yeah.
So
so
like
making
else,
it
right?
difficult to log out and sign out.
So they don't want you to do those things. And so they'll kind of hide those links. They'll make them look like just text. Your unsubscribes and emails. I can't tell you the number of times that it's a link. It's kind of acts like a button. But the number of times that you see a block of text, but you have to search for the word unsubscribe because they don't underline it. They don't make it look like a button. They don't want you to actually click it. So it's kind of that dark pattern. They're trying to encourage you not to do something that they don't want you to do when that's really what you're looking for. But that also started making me think, I can't think of any times of physical buttons where they really don't want you to do something that you would actually want to do. Because it would be, think about that comparison. If you were in the real world and you were trying to use a water fountain, but they like hid but then in that case, okay, that's dumb. I'm going to take that out because that's really stupid. And that analogy makes no goddamn sense. I was like, well, what if they hit the button? But then nobody can actually use it. So what's the point of that? Okay, so making him an analogy on the fly really failed there.
I think the point you're trying to make there, which spectacularly kind of went off track, is around there are certain things in the real world that you want people to do. For example, if you want them to exit a building quickly or you want them to get off the plane quickly, there's certain things that you want to be able to make that people can do very, very quickly. But of course, if you have the opportunity to cancel your subscription, cancel your membership, log out, and you don't want that to be very easy for a user to do, because they're not going to die if they still have that subscription. And of course, they can change their payment method. Their payment method could expire. Their account can still be active, and that gives you a way to continue to communicate with them, because of course, the cost that goes into acquiring that new user is very, very high. So if you can do these little subtle changes to make it a little bit more difficult, there's a bit more friction in there in order to exit, your numbers will drop in terms of how quickly people can actually exit the tool or log out or sign out or quit the subscription. And it is definitely a weird feeling. I know I had that recently when I was trying to unsubscribe from a newspaper subscription, and I was trying to find the unsubscribe, cancel my membership thing, and there's an 0800 number. And
Oh,
immediately the
yes.
level of friction was gigantic, because I was like, I'm going to have to call these people during like business hours from like 8 till 3 or something, whatever ridiculous time it was, to catch them, when of course I don't have to sit through the hold pattern for like, 40 minutes. And of course it means you're just going to procrastinate and leave that
Yeah,
till
just keep
later. It's
hanging. Yeah.
not, whereas if it was immediately easy for me to click that button, I would have done it. So there is these things around, you can modify things, as you said, around that dark pattern, where you can shape that user journey, and to try and keep them engaged, because next week they might just change their mind. They might use the platform or the service or the application or the content again and actually be really enjoying it. There might be a new addition to their particular streaming provider or whatever it is, and they'll be like, oh, actually, I do want this thing now.
Yeah, this is where I'm like, no, no. If they want to cancel, let them cancel. To me, you sound like that carnival guy. Like, come on, yes, you played the ring toss, but just one more try. Just
One
stick
more
around for a
try.
little bit longer. Throw another ring, another dollar, another dollar. Yeah, that's what I'm getting from you now. It's that business side coming out of like, well,
Well,
if they
it's
stay, they'll realize they like it.
it's that's exactly my point, is that you can make it a very attractive maze that they get stuck in forever and they never want to leave, and it's great and it's wonderful, but then there's that tipping point where they go bonkers and they definitely want to get out, and so you've got to support them through that exit process. But I think
You know
the
how I
thing
said we're not
that
designers? I'm really glad that we're not, because I don't want you anywhere near it at this point.
no, but we are involved in these decision making processes. We're going to be part of the process of kind of joining onto these discussions and influencing those people around us around how does this thing work and how can we change it, how can we make it better, or how can we make it more effective. And if one of the things you want is to reduce your sign out or your cancellation number, then of course there's some little things you can do in there. But I think the balance is really important. You want to be doing it for the right reasons. You want to make sure that the user, the customer, can still find the information that they need. But if they accidentally click the cancel button and they're like, oh, I didn't actually want to cancel, it's very difficult for them to get back and make time to re-sign up again and go through the authorization process and put in the number from their mobile phone for the two-factor authentication. It's so much harder to get them on board. You don't want to make it easy for them to accidentally exit.
But then again, some of the services I've used recently are so like trying to keep me engaged that yes, they'll let me cancel easy, but immediately when I cancel, they actually have splash screens. They're like, hey, did you really mean to cancel? You can just
Yeah.
click one button. So it actually is kind of nice in that sense that if I actually had made a mistake, which 99% of the time, I don't think I've ever go, yes, I'm going to cancel. Oh, no, you know what? I really like you guys. I want to come back. It really never actually happens like that. I might come back in a month or two time, like when I want that service again. Like I use a CV tool, right? It helps me write CVs, but I'm not applying for jobs every month. I get a job. I only need it every few years to like update it. Ooh, something like this podcast. I need to go update my CV. So maybe I'll go pay for the subscription soon, but then I'm going to cancel it. But as soon as I do, they do have this prompt right after the fact. Hey, did you mean to cancel? Also, here's a 10% discount if you want to come back right now, like right now. So actually, they're still got this marketing hooks in, but you've allowed people to do it. So you've actually allowed people to succeed in what they want to do. You're not gripping them, just holding them down.
Like holding them down and like forcing their hand to press the button, right? That's the level of interactivity we've got. Okay, so
you start moving your mouse and it starts moving your mouse back. You're like, wait a minute, you're like, click me.
The thing that I think is worth thinking about is that when you design for a touchscreen interface, a mobile phone, a tablet, you've got all these design libraries of the ways that buttons and sliders and switches work. And that's a very common language that people understand and they recognize and they know how to use it, but you're not creating a completely new interface for them. Whereas if you design a game or some kind of completely different user interface that has a totally different experience, people have still got to get up to speed with that as well. So it's about, do you need your user to know how to use it immediately, or is there a little bit of a learning curve associated with what you've presented them with?
Yeah, so that raises a good point for Jacob's law. So Jacob Nielsen, again, I actually referenced his usability heuristics earlier, and Jacob's law, paraphrasing it, is basically how people have used another website, they'll expect your website to act the same way. So the same thing as a door, right? If you use a door handle, you expect a door handle to be a door handle, and that's again the whole other issue of Norman doors. And that idea of like, oh, well, you thought you were using a handle the right way of pulling it. Oh, wait, no, actually, there's a push door. But the same thing applies to buttons and anything else in that interface. So, think about forms and stuff. You're filling out a form online, like a credit card application. if you're going to submit it, generally we, at least in English speaking countries, we read left to right. And so your submit or your OK button, whatever that is, that final confirmation thing, it's generally on the bottom right after you're done filling it in. But if you had to hunt for that, you're going to possibly, worst case, you're not going to fill in that application, which means you don't get the product you wanted, but also means the business doesn't get the sale they wanted.
That's a good point. I think for me, it was absolutely that dichotomy between one part of my brain really wanted to focus on the aesthetics of just making it look different and innovative and interesting every single time. And the other part of my brain just wanted to move at speed and just use the assets that were there and just create something that actually functions. And that's definitely the way that I've moved now, is that I'm far more focused on the system and the process and the journey that a user takes. So every time I see an online form or any kind of interface where the back or cancel or start again or go to top button is in too close a proximity to the one you actually want someone to press, they're all the same size, they might be in a row, they're all kind of clustered together. That for me is always, it feels like a mistake, because it's too easy for the user to accidentally press the wrong one, to sort of go back or restart. And the number of times I've done that by accident, because maybe I'm just going quite quickly and I haven't gone, am I reading the button before I'm clicking it, or am I just assuming that's the right one there? And of course, now that we're starting to interact more with touchscreen laptops and touchscreens for a desktop interface, like if you're using like a Microsoft Surface and that's a quite high resolution, and you're trying to tap like the close or expand or minimize button in Windows, it's impossible. You actually have to use the pen in order to do it. So I've always found,
don't you dare make me use a pen if I don't have
right.
To. That's for drawing. That's for drawing only, as far as I'm concerned.
So when they kind of, and I know some interfaces, if you switch to tablet mode, suddenly all those buttons get much, much bigger and much, much uglier. So it's easy to touch them. But I think that's an interesting thing. There still seems in operating systems to be a little bit of resistance to, making those things as easy as possible to interact with. Or do you just make them really aesthetically nice and kind of minimized, and you don't even know what they are until you roll over them? You've actually got to like roll over it and go, oh, that's actually what that button does. But it does become like muscle memory very quickly when you're using an interface like that regularly.
And I do, even on that note, I want to caution anybody listening that muscle memory is not an excuse for bad design. It's not like, there's so often do you hear that kind of conversation is, oh, well, they'll figure out how to use this. Again, like you invent a new button. Oh, well, they'll figure it out. Yeah, but what's the chance you've lost them the very first time? How many people have you actually missed because they couldn't even do that thing? So if you're like, if it is an app or a website and you're tracking conversions, and so you see like how many people enter the page and look, only 20% left the page. Well, some people might go, oh, well, my marketing needs to be better. I need better visuals. I need better whatever it is. I need better content. But maybe it's not that. Maybe it is, but maybe it's also that you've designed it in such a way that they don't know how to continue. And you can find that stuff out in usability testing. It's one of those easiest things to do, is you even drawing it on paper to start with and just seeing, can people actually figure out how to go to these next steps? Just do that as a bare minimum.
Absolutely agree with that point.
Another aspect of this is time, right? So generally, you don't want to be trying to consume as much of the time of your users as possible, because you want them to get where they're going, lest they decide that this is taking too long and I want to quit. So have you heard of Fitts Law?
No. Tell me about Fitts Law.
So Fitts Law, reading the technical definition, the time it takes to acquire a target is a function of the distance to and size of the target. So to try to make that a little easier, it's basically the bigger or smaller the button, the longer or shorter it might take to actually click it. And it depends on how far away it is as well. So you talked about trying to, find those tiny little buttons, and you're trying to click these tiny little things. Well, the more precise you have to be, the more time it's therefore taking you. Even if it's in milliseconds, all that stuff adds up. It's all fatigue to the user in time. Let's say compare it to a crosswalk button, right? The crosswalk button is quite big. It's this huge target. It's on a pole. They also might make noise, which is even better, but you can't really miss it. There's this giant button and it's got a lot of surface area. So whether it's your elbow, your wrist, your palm, your butt, your fingers, whatever it is, your foot, you can kick it if you want to. I don't recommend it. I don't want to be touching your shoes on a button, but who knows? People have done a lot worse in public. So yeah, we don't know where your hands have been.
Exactly. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty of inappropriate button touching. But no, I
can that be the title of this episode? Inappropriate button touching.
Yeah. Don't touch my button. You need consent.
Oh man,
to touch
so good
button.
ideas. The title that I actually come out with is going to be way lamer than all this, but yeah.
Talking about that sort of angle on Fitz law is really interesting, because one of the things that I find really fascinating that I found out about recently, and I didn't know until I kind of went through a little bit of the history of Apple. So I was watching a couple of little short documentaries online, and also started reading a book by Ken Kosienda called Creative Selection, which is inside Apple's design process during the golden age of Steve Jobs. And Ken Kosienda was on the design team that was working out the new interface for how to control the keyboard on the iPhone. So there was two development teams at the time. One was essentially taking Mac OS X and trying to make it work on a very small device. And the other team was taking the iPod interface and trying to work out, can you use that same iPod interface to interact with the phone? And they could kind of do almost everything they needed to do with the iPod interface except dial a number. Because when you were using that little on-screen, that touch wheel, you had to rotate, and it pretty much became like a rotary phone, and that just didn't work. Whereas the team that was developing the keyboard were really struggling, because the screen at the time was so small. It was very, very difficult. And the one change that Ken's team did, and they were the last team to present on the day. So it's actually quite a dramatic story if you want to sort of look it up online. They went through, I think, 16 different teams, presented 16 different interfaces, and they all failed. Jobs said, none of these work. Okay. They're all totally crap. This is going to be impossible. And the last team that Ken was driving demonstrated this interface, and it worked. And everyone was blown away, and they were like, how is this working? You can actually touch these tiny buttons on the screen and it's working. And the thing that they'd done was they'd changed the hit area. So invisibly, they were changing the size of the button based on predictive text. So if you were going to type the word the, invisibly after you press the word T, the likelihood of you pressing H was very, very high. So invisibly on the screen, the hit area of the H became bigger, but you couldn't actually see it. But your massive finger could actually touch H a lot easier than all the other keys that were around it. So you could actually kind of type quite quickly. So even now, when we think we're really clever, like speed touch typing on a phone.
I thought it was like the world champion of two-thumb typing.
We are not actually touching those buttons. The buttons actually get bigger, and we're actually hitting a hit area that's invisible, that's based on a predictive text dictionary that's actually in the phone. So of course, then they put that predictive text dictionary on screen, and you could start tapping those words. And that was the interface breakthrough that pretty much changed everything about the way that we can interface with digital devices. If that team hadn't have cracked that code around just make the button bigger, but don't make it bigger so you can see it, if they hadn't done that, we still would have been stuck with something. It might have taken them another year or two to actually get there, which I think was an amazing transformation.
Yeah, I think I really will have to go, edit my CV now and take off the whole world record holder for typing with two thumbs, the self-appointed title that I have, to brag about at parties. But yeah, no, seriously, I can type maybe 50% as fast as on a regular keyboard, if not 75%, just because I've learned how to do it. But then with each phone, the slightest change in my keyboard height drastically alters the error rates that I have for how often I'm pressing the wrong button. And so it's like, I've got to configure it just right for the expected area, that muscle memory. So it is muscle memory at that point.
It's interesting to overlay on that the haptic feedback. Is some people really like
this, yes.
They really would like the interface, the phone to kind of tap and move effectively when it's typing. I've switched it off. It sort of it freaks me out. It's a bit weird, So I think
talk. Yeah, I hate it.
Exactly. But it's interesting that I'm still using like an iPhone 7. I haven't updated because I still like the home button. But I know now in this particular phone, it's not a physical button because it's also the thumbprint scanner. So they couldn't let the button move. It had to be fixed. But they've included that little haptic motor. Whereas the buttons on the outside of your phone, the volume button up and down, those ones still actually move, and you get that real world depress that you get. But the home button doesn't give you that. And if you want to have the haptic turned on for other kinds of functions when you're typing or closing something or popping an app open, you can program that if you really want to have that feedback happening.
Like that's literally one of the first things I do with my new phones is I go into the settings and I start looking for all the ways to turn off almost all the sounds, because also this is a pet theory. I think the sounds slow me down, and I don't know if I'm just crazy.
Like you're waiting. Yeah, no, you're waiting for them. Yeah.
So if I am actually waiting, I feel like it makes me slower, and therefore I want to type fast. I want to be a faster typer. I started thinking of my Xbox controller that I've got. And there's triggers, there's round buttons, there's directional arrows, all these things, but they all have their own kind of unique haptic feedback depending on what you're doing. So if it was a racing game and you're accelerating with the trigger, it might like feel like your tires are spinning. If you're shooting a gun, it might feel like you're firing something. Yeah, I think it's always really interesting in that sense. And it's now a true blend between the digital world of something you're doing on screen, but a physical thing that you're actually controlling.
We're essentially talking about buttons that you're not looking at while you're interacting with them, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
often I think
it'd be really hard to play a game if you're staring at the controller the entire time.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I've noticed that's changed sort of more recently as well, is that if you're, interacting with an operating system and you're moving your mouse to click a button, you're not really like pressing it, right? You might get a little bit of visual feedback for what's happening versus when you're using a touchscreen interface and you're either getting that visual feedback for touching and holding, or like multi-touch, or 3D touch on a screen, and what happens next when you sort of press that. Because one thing I've noticed recently is that and have been, I think, for a while now, is actually doing touch typing on my phone, and I'm not looking where my fingers are going. I'm not trying to look at any interaction with the keyboard at all to see if I'm typing the right thing. I'm just looking at where the words are going. And I've noticed that my typing's gotten worse. And I think it's because I'm not looking at all to get any confirmation from the keyboard. Am I even going in the right direction? I'm just sort of staring and typing madly. And I'm going, oh, wow, why has my typing got worse? It's an interesting transition around, like, we've got these buttons that we look at in the real world where we're looking for some kind of indication of what it does, so we can invoke a command, or we can actually action something. Everything from touching the exit button when you go out a door, is that something now that's going to be like a light beam where you want to pass your hand through it without actually touching it? Maybe we'll get a few more interfaces that we can interact with without touching them, compared to a really complicated interface, which might be like a crane or other kind of piece of machinery or piece of military technology or something that you have to get in and learn how to pilot that thing and press all these buttons. Different kinds of planes, Boeing versus Airbus, a totally different language of all the buttons and commands and controls that you touch while you're not looking. You're focused on what you're doing, and you're doing everything by touch.
Yeah, so thinking of intuitive buttons in that sense, there's one other element of physical buttons that I can't think of any immediate example in the digital world that acts the same, and that's hidden functionality of buttons. The first two examples that come to mind are, one, I've got a flashlight that if you press it once, it's a very high beam, high intensity light. If you press it and hold it the very first time you turn it on, it's a more softer one. And then once it's on and you press and hold it again, it starts adjusting like the beam of light, like whether it's a big cone or really narrow. You would have never known those things unless you actually read the instructions. And so intuitive wise, it's not there. It's this hidden function.
There's clearly a business need in there, which is around every time you add one more button to something in the physical real world, it's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
I know for the average Bluetooth speaker, the next button will do a range of different things. It'll either you hold it down and the volume goes up. You press it once, it skips. If you press it 3 times, it goes backwards or something. All these different things. And the same is true with Bluetooth headphones as well. That if you tap the outside on one side, it does something. One thing mutes the other one. The volume goes up. The other thing, it turns it off. And you're like, again, you've got to read the instructions. That we haven't really established an exact language for exactly how to use those things and how they should function. And it's going to take a while to get there. I know on the little headphones I'm using are the old Apple ones, where you've got the down button and the up button and the mute sort of function in between. And you get the hang of that because it comes out as a convention and everyone else starts to use it as sort of a standard that we have for a while. But I think for a lot of these smaller consumer electronics that lots of different companies have manufactured, they've all kind of come out at the same time, and no one kind of agreed on what the format would be for what do all these buttons do. So everything's different. So you'll be, someone will be playing some music on a speaker and you'll go up and you want to turn the volume up and you've just accidentally skipped the track, or you've turned the phone off, or you've done something crazy. Because it's not as intuitive as it'd be nice if it was.
I mean, I've got 3 different headsets, and like the Google Pixel Buds that I've got, those require, I can't even remember without using it. I can't actually remember which one does what. One of them, if you tap it, it actually plays the track. And then I've got a Samsung headset that if you do one tap, it skips the track. But the other, so it's basically the opposite. One, a double tap pauses. One, a single tap pauses. It's totally different. One, you swipe forward to change the volume. One, you swipe up. So that gets in the whole gesture controls, and we won't really dive into that too much. But thinking of just buttons on headsets while we're here, I've got another over-ear headset right now, and as we were trying to set up this podcast, like to get ready to record today, I tried to turn on my noise canceling, or I tried to turn on the headset itself, and then I was trying to turn off Bluetooth because that button also controls noise canceling for whatever reason. And then all of a sudden it started trying to call people. It started trying to play music, and I'm just trying to turn off Bluetooth. But it's one button that has like, oh, well, if you press it for 5 seconds, it does this, but 3 seconds, it does this. And 1 second, it's a totally different thing. And in the end, it just shows a Bluetooth symbol. And I have no idea which one it is. I've been using these for seriously about 5 years now, and I still have no idea what controls are in what spot. It just makes no sense.
That's a fantastic point. And I think maybe we've uncovered something that is perhaps a thing that we can put out into the world, which is maybe the one little thing that we'd like to influence. And that is standards for technology and the way that systems and platforms and communications equipment work are established years, if not 5 to 10 years ahead of when you start to use them. So the streaming codec compression that handles 8K video to your phone will be in development now, even though you can't get 8K video on your phone yet. But that standard will be in development now. And the interesting thing about that is that's like a math problem to solve, right? That's a technology communications problem that developers work on, and you have these associations that will get together and work out that standard. But there does seem to be a missing link there around interfaces. The company that's building that Bluetooth speaker, they're using the same Wi-Fi standard. They're using the same Bluetooth standard. They're using all the same standards for everything inside that machine, effectively, except for the touch interface on the top. They've kind of had to make it up. So if there's one thing that I'd like to see a change occur, is that the associations that come up with all these communication standards can start to think about the communication standards that humans need to interface with for buttons and technology, so that if they can start to bring that in, then it makes it so much easier for different companies to be using the same standard. But you think that's a pretty important problem that someone should solve and be like, yes, this thing does this. On this side, you press it and it does this thing.
They just list it as a feature. Oh, exactly. You tap this, and you just try to market these features. It's the same thing, but you try to make it spin and make it sound different.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest challenge, right? Is that when a team has to try and work out a solution on their own, sometimes they'll land on a great solution, other times they won't. But when you actually get that consensus beforehand and establish a standard, then everyone goes, okay, it's not quite as good as it could be, but at least we're all using the same one. As soon as you jump onto a different system, you can use it really simply and easily. And so maybe that's an everyday improvement that we can hope that we could get one day.
Unless you're Apple, and then we'll go, no, we will make our own lightning cables. We will make our own things. Oh, fine. We'll use USB-C. Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, your phone no longer has any cables at all. And then you're in real trouble.
So, you know what? One last fun thing, because we've been talking about buttons, right? We've been talking about physical buttons, digital buttons. What about shirt buttons? I wanted to stick on this for just like a few seconds, but shirt buttons, right? We talked about that idea of as you button things, or as you use any kind of system, digital or physical, you expect it to start to work consistently between platforms. Well, how about just when you're buttoning your shirt? Most of them are vertical kind of, what do you call it? Is it the slit? Like, what do you call the things the buttons go into? I have no idea what this is even called.
It's literally called a buttonhole.
Oh yeah, buttonhole. It sounds dirty, but the buttonhole. So there's all these vertical buttonholes, but then on some shirts is now a horizontal one on their very last buttonhole. And that little thing, right? You're buttoning. You're doing it without looking, like we've talked about. You're buttoning, you're not paying attention, you're doing it. And then there's this last one that throws you for a loop for a second because it won't go in. Oh, it's because they changed the format. They changed the orientation of this thing. And that's not to mention between unisex male and female shirts and any of these, whether it's zippers on the opposite side, buttons on the opposite side, depending on where you buy it, what you're buying, who it's made for, all of those things could drastically change that experience of just putting on shirt, putting on pants, zipping up a hoodie.
It's definitely one of those interface elements that you use kind of by touch and muscle memory, and you use your familiarity with that interface as soon as you put on that piece of clothing and you go, this zipper does not work how I thought it was going to work, and does that even close, and does that thing have to dangle there, and is this Velcro thing going to shut properly? Some like a really complicated jacket or something like a ski jacket is like, wow, this is totally different to just the normal jacket that I would wear. That's a lot more simple, like really over-engineered, complicated clothing. The kinds of buttons that we interact with on a daily basis, sometimes they're things that we're very familiar with using. It's muscle memory we've had for a very, very long time, our entire lives, and other times it'll be a completely new interaction. And I think that's where that really interesting space is. We're introducing a new way of interacting with something, and are people going to be used to this? Are they going to use their baggage of how they usually interact with this kind of visual signifier and know how to press it and know how to interact with it? And is that going to be a difficult thing? Are you creating more friction for the user the first time they're presented with this, or is there something that they're familiar with and they're going to be really comfortable using?
So thinking about being comfortable, my wife had actually, I got to give her all the credit for this. I was asking right before we recorded, it's like, do you have any button thoughts? Like just anything about buttons? She's like, well, physical. I'm like, hey, it could be physical. She's like, clothing. It could be clothing. And she goes, did you ever know, or did you ever hear that there's some people that are actually afraid of buttons? And I was like, no, I'm very intrigued at this point. She said, yeah, there's people there's a phobia apparently. And I looked it up. It's now, again, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here.
What is it called? Tell me.
Componophobia.
Wow. Okay.
It's like the ultimate Scrabble world. I don't think you could even possibly get that many Scrabble like characters in your board. It's a lot. But basically, it's kind of less of a fear, it looks like, but more of a texture thing, a disgust. So I guess the way the buttons feel, or the thought of how many, like a germ aspect to this as well, but possibly just people being disgusted by the buttons in the shirt. And fun fact, we mentioned Steve Jobs earlier. Allegedly, he might have had this phobia. He might not have liked buttons. The iPhone that came out, it was the first phone that really didn't have a keyboard, a physical keyboard. It had one button, or the iPod. Do you think his fear of buttons played into that? We may never know.
Interesting. He was trying to save the entire world from button-based interfaces, and now it's all just digital instead of real buttons.
He succeeded, I guess.
But it must be a really, really strange thing to sort of be surrounded by these buttons every day and find that difficult. So it's really interesting,
especially if you don't know what's going to happen when you press your start button and touch it. That's a new world. I would love to hear about it. And with that, we've covered buttons quite a bit, but I have a sneaking suspicion this is not going to be the end of the buttons. I think this is going to be like buttons part 1, because now that we've talked about it, again, we're going to go out and we're just going to start noticing these things more, like I hope everybody listening does. And I'm sure we're going to start coming up with like a million new examples. I mean, I know elevator buttons, UX designers and us, we love to pick on those because we've only briefly touched the surface on elevators today. But yeah, there's a lot more to go into. So maybe in time, buttons round 2.
Exactly. And if I can work out how to press your buttons, we'll be in a good position.
Oh, Jesus, we're ending with the pun. And with that, folks, thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope that made you think of a few new things. If you'd like to continue this conversation or see examples of what we were talking about today, you can find and follow us on social media at EverydayEXPPod or myself at Geoff Wilson HCD. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app and leaving us a rating so we can keep this going. And just remember, you don't have to have a fancy job title to start noticing and improving the everyday experiences wherever you work. Thanks, and we'll be on the air again soon. I can't even keep up with what we're at now. I just see things on my phone and I just use it. I'm luckily out of that world where I have to care about which way, if it's like flat designs and shadows and stuff. I'm really happy I'm not in that anymore.